He stayed there as long as the act against conventicles was in force, and when it was expired, he had so many came to hear him that he wanted room. Hereupon, he by a warrant of 2 justices was committed to New Prison Gaol for 6 months, but he got a habeas corpus and was released and removed to Totteridge, near Barnet. While he was there, Duke Lauderdale, going into Scotland, signified to him a purpose there was of taking off the oath of canonical obedience and all impositions of conformity, save only that it should be necessary to sit in presbyteries and synods with the bishops and moderators, and that he had the king's consent to offer him what place in Scotland he would choose, either a church or a college or a bishopric. But he excused himself from his weakness and indisposition and the circumstances of his family. After the indulgence in 1672, he returned to his preaching in the city. He was one of the Tuesday lecturers at Pinner's Hall and had a Friday lecture at Fetter Lane, but on Lord's days he only preached occasionally. He afterwards preached in St. James's Market House, where on July the 5th, 1674, they had a marvellous deliverance. For a main beam that had before been considerably weakened by the weight of the people gave such cracks that 3 several times they ran out of the room, concluding it was falling. The next day, talking about the boards, they found that 2 rents in the beam were so great that it was a wonder of Providence that the floor had not fallen and the roof with it, to the destruction of multitudes. He was afterwards apprehended as he was preaching his Thursday lecture at Mr. Turner's, but soon released because the warrant was not signed by a city justice, as it should have been, when he was apprehended for preaching in the city. In 1676, by the assistance of his friends, he built a new meeting house in Oxenden Street, and when he had preached there but once, a resolution was taken to surprise him the next time and to send him for 6 months to gaol upon the Oxford Act. But he being out of town, Mr. Seddon, a Derbyshire minister, preaching for him, was sent to the gatehouse in his room, though the warrant did not suit him, and he was forced to continue there 3 months, till he had a habeas corpus. He afterwards built another meeting house in St. Martin's parish, but was forcibly kept out of it by constables and officers, and thereupon Mr. Wadsworth in Southwark, dying he upon the invitation of his people preached to them many months in peace. And when Dr. Lloyd succeeded Dr. Lamplough in St. Martin's parish, he offered him his chapel in Oxenden Street for public worship and accepted it. Anno 1682. He was suddenly surprised in his house by an informer with constables and officers who served upon him a warrant to seize on his person for coming within 5 miles of a corporation, and 5 more warrants in distrain for £195 for 5 sermons. He was going with them to a justice, though extremely bad as to his health, till meeting Dr. Cox, he forced him back to his bed and went and took his oath before 5 justices that he could not go to prison without danger of death. The king, being consulted, consented that his imprisonment should for that time be forborne. But they executed the warrants on the books and goods in the house, though he made it appear they were none of his, and they sold the bed he lay upon. Some friends paid down the money they were appraised at, and he repaid them. Being afterwards in danger of new seizures, he was forced to retire to private lodgings. Anno 1684, he was again seized upon and carried to the sessions, when he was scarce able to stand, and bound in a bond of £400 to his good behaviour, and was told that the proceeding was only to secure the government against suspected persons. He was some time after carried again to the sessions house in great pain and forced to continue bound. He refused to stand bound, not knowing what they might interpret a breach of the peace, but his sureties would be bound lest he should die in a gaol. He was carried thither a 3rd time and still bound, though for the most part he kept his bed. Though he was thus treated all King Charles's reign, he yet prayed as heartily for him as any man, and he was often consulted about terms and measures for a union between the conformists and nonconformists, as to which he was ever free to give his sentiments. He was not for comprehension without indulgence. Nor for a bare indulgence without the enlargement of the act of uniformity to a greater comprehension, but for the conjunction of both. He declared this when he was consulted by a person of honor, anno 1663. In the year 1668, Dr. Bates, and he waited on the Lord Keeper Bridgeman by desire, in order to a treaty about a comprehension and toleration, and were afterwards met by Dr. Wilkins and Mr. Burton, with whom they conferred. The thing they most differed about was reordination. At length, by conference with Sir Matthew Hale, that point was thus adjusted that there should be an admission into the ministry of the Church of England of such as had been before ordained, according to this form of words: Take thou legal authority to preach the word of God and administer the holy sacraments in any congregation of England, where thou shalt be lawfully appointed hereunto. It was agreed the ceremonies should be left indifferent and the liturgy altered, and that there should be an indulgence of such as could not be comprehended. And a bill was drawn up by Judge Hale to be presented to the Parliament, but the High Church party made such an interest that it was carried by a vote that no man should bring a bill of this nature. He afterwards, in the year 1673, upon the desire of the Earl of Orrery, drew up terms of union between the conformists and the nonconformists in order to their joint vigorous opposing popery. And the next year there was also an agreement upon like terms between Dr. Stillingfleet and Dr. Tillotson and Dr. Manton, Dr. Bates, Mr. Poole and Mr. Baxter, and an act was proposed to be brought in the next session of Parliament in pursuance of the treaty. But Dr. Tillotson wrote word to Mr. Baxter that as circumstances stood, such an act could not pass in either house without the concurrence of a considerable part of the bishops and His Majesty's countenance, which at that time he saw little reason to expect. In the reign of King James II, Mr. Baxter was committed to the King's Bench prison by warrant from the Lord Chief Justice Jeffreys for his paraphrase on the New Testament, which was called a scandalous and seditious book against the government. On May 30th, 1685, he was brought to his trial. The passages mentioned in the information were his paraphrase on Matthew 5:19, Mark 9:39, Mark 11:31, Mark 12 verses 38 through 40, Luke 10:2, John 11:57, and Acts 15:2, and a certain noted clergyman put into the hands of his enemies some accusations out of his paraphrase on Romans 13, etc., as against the king, to touch his life, but no use was made of them. Jeffreys interrupted his counsel in pleading for him, and treated Mr. Baxter most scornfully and rudely. He had given judgment against him, June 29, when he was fined 500 marks and to lie in prison till he paid it, and bound to his good behavior for 7 years. But the next year, King James, altering his measures, many of the dissenters that were imprisoned were released. After their fines were remitted, and among the rest, Mr. Baxter obtained his pardon by the mediation of the Lord Powys. His fine was remitted, and November the 24th, Sir Samuel Astray sent his warrant to the Keeper of the King's Bench to discharge him. But he gave sureties for his good behavior, for His Majesty's declaring for his satisfaction that it should not in him be interpreted a breach of the good behavior for him to reside in London, which was not allowable by the Oxford Act, and this was entered upon his ballpiece. He continued some time in the rules, and in February following removed to a house in Charterhouse Yard.